Welcome to the City of Decatur's Anti-Racism Speaker Series. Jane Elliott is the first of four speakers invited to join us in conversation this fall as we work to become an anti-racist city. This series is hosted by the Better Together Advisory Board in partnership with the Decatur City Commission. We wanted to start by thanking each of the over 500 registrants from Illinois, California, Maryland, Virginia, Tennessee, New Hampshire, Connecticut, North Carolina, Johannesburg, South Africa, and various parts of Georgia for joining us today. We are honored that you have decided to digitally hang out in our little city. We have a couple of logistical announcements before shifting to the heart of the program. One, we are hoping for a robust Q&A session after the presentation. Please submit your questions by placing them in the Q&A box found in the panel at the bottom of the screen if you're on a laptop or a desktop, or at the top of the screen if you're on a mobile device. Two, we turned off the features that allow for us to capture or share your images. You should only see images of me and Ms. Elliott doing the webinar. And three, you will receive a short 2-minute anonymous survey after the program that will inform our future events. I am Ed Lee. I serve as a Better Together Advisory Board. That board works to generate awareness of and responses to inequities and injustices in a manner that strives to improve the interactions between community members and city officials while serving as a springboard for policy and programmatic changes. The initial idea for this series was birthed in a desire to respond to our social and political climate that seems to be so broken that uttering the unsaleable truth that Black Lives Matter has come to be seen as an act of resistance. This series exists because far too many of our neighbors in Decatur fear that the 7 paralyzing shots recently fired into the back of Jacob Blake and the subsequent militia-style killing of 2 protesters 790 miles away in Kenosha, Wisconsin, constitutes a harbinger of our own demise as we exercise our civil and human rights. The roots of this series are located in our collective acknowledgement that misunderstanding of an insufficient response to the various ways that racism perverts educational policies and undermines educational attainment for students of color cannot be addressed unless we are in conversation with people who have dedicated their lives to dismantling racism. That is why we are so excited and honored to have Jane Elliott join us today. Jane Elliott is an internationally renowned teacher and anti-racism activist. Galvanized by Dr. King's assassination in 1968, Ms. Elliott has dedicated her life to exposing the subtle and vulgar ways that we socialize children to become weapons of hate. The results of her haunting blue eyes, brown eyes exercise continues to shock the conscience as it reveals the ease in which we turn to arbitrary markers of difference to justify and legitimize racist practices. The fact that the primary suspect for the recent killing of the 2 protesters in Kenosha is 17 years old is a reminder of the failure of many of our educational practices to serve as a sufficient counterweight to the prejudice and bigotry that exist in many of our communities. In other communities, they function as an accelerant of those same forms of bigotry. It is clear that we need her voice and wisdom now more than ever. Welcome to Decatur, Ms. Elliott. The digital floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm not cutting out the way you did. Am I? I hope I'm not, but just in case I am, I'm going to keep on speaking until you tell me you can't hear anything I'm saying. Perhaps you'd be better off if you couldn't hear anything I'm saying, because I'm angry. I'm not just perturbed. I'm not just frustrated. I'm not just old. I am now. The reason I'm here is because racism is still here. I am not an anti-racist person. I am a pro-human person. It's more important to be pro something than it is to be anti something. Anybody can be anti something. You don't have to do anything except complain about it. If you're pro, then you have to do something and make the situation different. The situation in this country is at the absolutely lowest point in my lifetime, which is surprising since I lived through the civil rights movement. I was born at the same year that Adolf Hitler and Franklin Roosevelt came to power. So I am definitely a dinosaur. There's no doubt about it. But having been a dinosaur, I know what happens when you have a dinosaur in leading your country. We've been through this before, people. What we are going through right now is what people went through in Germany during the Nazi years. And if you think I'm exaggerating that, then you need to get the book, When at Times the Mob is Swayed. I would suggest that every one of you buy a copy of this book and read it, by Bert Newborn. It's absolutely essential that everyone realizes what's going on in this country today and why it is happening. If you don't read anything else in the rest of your life, read this book. If you don't want to read the whole thing, just read the first 2 chapters. And you'll find out that our leader right now has in a locked drawer in his bedside table the writings of Adolf Hitler. And if you were my age, you would realize that the things that are happening in this country today are exactly what were happening when Adolf Hitler took over Germany and then attempted to rule the world. I know you think I'm exaggerating, and particularly if you're Republicans, you think, there she goes, another one of those left-wing radicals. No, I'm not a left-wing radical. I'm an old woman who has been through this before. I recognize what's going on, and I know what we have to do to stop it. And what we have to do to stop it is, number 1, realize what's happening. Number 2, recognize the rights of everyone instead of just the rights of a few, and respect those rights and refuse to go along with something that destroys the rights of any human being on the face of the earth, but particularly in this country in which I have been a citizen for the last 86 years. Now some of you are thinking, yeah, you should have died earlier. Well, I didn't. But racism should have died earlier, and this kind of behavior should have died earlier. And if we had been doing a good job in education, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today. You need to know, people, that if you don't learn anything else, and for those of you who decide to turn off and go away, you're going to have to hear this before you do. There's only one race of people on the face of the earth, and that is the human race. All of us are descendants of those first very dark-skinned people who evolved in sub-Saharan Africa between 300,000 and 500,000 years ago. Now that's a fact. And if you don't believe it, then you get the book, The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman. I would advise every one of you, if you don't want to read the whole thing, and I know you don't have time to read a whole lot of things, you have time for golf, and you have time for fishing, and you have time for lots of fun things, but you don't have as much time as you might have for reading. So I'm going to make it easy for you. Read the first chapter of that book and the last page of the last chapter. And what you'll find out is that old broad knew what she was talking about. There really is only one race, because now somebody else has said so. Robert Wald Sussman did a marvelous job of research in order to write that book. The only mistake he made was calling the book The Myth of Race. People, a myth is something that you make up to explain something you don't understand in nature. The Greeks had a myth that they thought that the sun was a golden chariot that carried a god across the sky every morning. That was a myth they made up to explain something they didn't understand. A lie, however, is something that you make up to justify your ugly and unacceptable behaviors. The idea of more than one race on the face of the earth is a lie. There's only one race of people on the face of the earth, and that's the human race, Homo sapiens. Now, if you don't believe me about that, get the book Sapiens by, just a minute now. I don't know why they use such heavy paper to write this book. I tell you, you'd have to be very strong to read it. It's really disgusting. But get this book by the man's last name is Harari. Read this book, or at least read parts of it, people. You think you're educated because maybe you have a PhD, maybe you have several PhDs. I have a couple of those honorary degrees. They don't make me any smarter. And if I didn't keep on reading, I wouldn't be any smarter and I wouldn't be any more knowledgeable. If you want to learn something, you have to self-educate, folks, because education in this country is actually indoctrination. We are not leading children out of ignorance, K through 12. We are indoctrinating them to make them good United States of America citizens. But we don't call this country the United States generally. We call it America. People, that's another thing you need to remember for as long as you live. America is not just the 48 contiguous states and Alaska and Hawaii and the islands off the southeastern coast of the United States. America is everything from the northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America. Everything in here is America, and everyone in these countries is an American. So when you have a president, and we've had several, I know I've been alive for several, who stands up at the end of his remarks and says, "God bless you and God bless America." He doesn't mean God bless everybody from the northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America. He means everybody in those 48 contiguous states, Alaska, Hawaii, and the islands off the southeastern coast of the United States. People, we need to be more precise in our language. And if we can't be, those of you who insist on continuing to call people white and black need to be more precise in your language. If you don't believe me when I say that, folks, there are no white people on the face of the earth unless you're suffering from severe albinism. Every human being on the face of the earth, because we are all descendants of those first so-called black human beings, have in their bodies, some in their DNA, some of the DNA from those first modern human beings. And they had lots of melanin in their system because their bodies produced a lot of melanin to protect their cells from the rays of the sun. Now, this is a set of people that is in the National Geographic magazine for April of 2018. Everybody get the National Geographic magazine for April of 2018. Get this, buy it so that you can take this page out, have it laminated, and then hang it somewhere where everybody who comes to your house or your office can see it. Because, folks, what this shows you is these are the colors of human beings. You'll notice that there isn't one person on this sheet who is this color, because people do not come in that color, folks. None of us are white. The word white was used because white, according to the people who are running the Spanish Inquisition, white is the color of purity and goodness. Those of us whom they decided not to kill, they described as white. Those of us who were available for killing, they used skin color to decide who should or should not die during the Spanish Inquisition, because they realized quickly that after it killed a lot of Christians, that you couldn't tell what a person's religion was by looking at them. So they had to find another way to define who was logical to kill. So they set upon skin color. People, we started that about between 500 and 600 years ago. Anything that you did 500 and 600 years ago, if you are still doing it, you need to realize that you're making a great big mistake. We've got to stop using the language from the 15th and 16th centuries to solve problems in the 21st century. And if you insist on using those two words, white and black, then you must give up everything that you didn't have in the 15th and 16th century, which means you won't have any more television, and you won't have any more computers, and you won't have to listen to anything like this because you won't have any electricity. If you're going to be of that nature, if that's the way you want to be educated, get yourself a nice slate and a slate crayon and take notes with a slate and a slate crayon. If you're going to go back that far, let's go back that far everywhere, every way. Men, get some nice knee-length trousers, and some nice powdered wigs to wear when you leave the house. If you want to use words like white and black for people, that's what you need to do. Go to the past, don't look to the future. But if you're going to look to the future, you have to realize that there's only one race of people on the face of the earth, and that's the human race. Now, yesterday, I talked to a group of a corporation, and several of the people, when it was over, the woman called me and said, well, we just thought it was wonderful. Everybody was so pleased. I said, wait a minute. There must have been some people who weren't pleased. She said, well, yes. And I said, and they were. She said, well, actually, it was the millennials. I said, the millennials? She said, yes, they want to know. They said things like, why do we have to give up our race? Why do we all have to think of ourselves as members of the same race? Why can't we be the race we are? For the love of God, people, you are the race you are, the human race. You are lots of different color groups in the human race, but there's only one race of people. If you don't learn anything else here today, learn that. You are all my 30th to 50th cousins. Now, you might not want me for a cousin, and I don't care whether you want me or not. You are my 30th or 50th to 50th cousins. And I get really angry when some of my pale-skinned cousins abuse some of my darker-skinned cousins not because of skin color, because skin color is natural, because of the ignorance about skin color. What we have to do is educate in such a way that we get over the ignorance about skin color. Now, I didn't know this when I was your age. I didn't know this when I was 25. I didn't know this when I was 30. I thought I knew by the time I was 32. And then when I was 33, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. I was teaching third grade in all white, all Christian Riceville, Iowa. And we had come from Waterloo, Iowa, which is called, at that time, was called Little Chicago because there was a large black population there. My husband ran a National Tea food store in the north end of town, which was in the black section. And we learned in Waterloo, Iowa, that all the things that we had heard, the ugly, ugly, negative things that we had heard about black people when we were growing up, were wrong. His customers were probably 98% black. And the only person who stole from him on a regular basis was the federal meat inspector. And he was white. And Daryl didn't dare complain about it, because if he did, he wouldn't pass the next test, the next examination, or whatever it is you call it, that the federal meat inspector had to give him permission to run his meat department. He wouldn't pass that if Daryl complained about the federal meat inspector stealing meat from him every month. Now think about that. His black employees were not a problem. The federal inspector was a problem. We learned a lot about blacks in Waterloo, Iowa, and it was mostly, practically, wholly, almost 99% positive. And then we got moved out of town because the black NAACP decided that they would pick up the National Tea Store in the North End because his one black employee had resigned to go to college. The National Tea Company would allow Daryl to have one black employee in that store in Waterloo, Iowa, in which the vast majority of his customers were black. So because Daryl had lost his black employee, the NAACP picketed him. And National Tea, to get even, moved the store from the east side of Waterloo to the west side of Waterloo. Those black people couldn't get across to the west side of Waterloo. Many of them didn't have cars. And so what the National Tea Company had done was take away their opportunity to get good groceries at a decent price and conveniently. We left National Tea shortly after that and moved back to Riceville. And I took a job teaching in the Riceville Community School, third grade. Our lesson plan in 1968, our lesson plan for the week, we were studying the Indian unit, and we shouldn't have called it the Indian unit because those folks weren't Indians. We have misnamed them for years. We were studying that Indian unit, and our lesson plan for the next day was to learn the Sioux Indian prayer that said, "Oh, Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins." I was carrying the teepee under my arm when I went into my house that night after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, and I'd been in school all day, so I hadn't heard anything on television or the radio. Walked in, the telephone was ringing. I answered the telephone. It was my sister. She said, "Is your television on?" I said, "No." She said, "You better turn it on." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because they shot him." I said, "Who'd we shoot this time?" Because we were in a shooting mode at that time. And she said, "Martin Luther King Jr." And then my world stopped for about 30 seconds. He had been one of our heroes of the month in February. And he was our hero of the month because he was trying to take care of an ugliness called racism in this country. He was trying to bring people together. And he and Malcolm X were coming much, much closer together at that time. Malcolm X believed you needed violence. Martin Luther King Jr. was opposed to violence. They were coming much closer together in philosophy. And the people who run this show knew that if those two black men and their followers combined, they could have upset this country in a hurry and in a positive way, but many of us who are so-called white people don't want to have happen. So they had to kill them both, and they both were killed. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. So I washed and dried the teepee. I fed the kids. I spread the teepee out on the living room floor. I put the kids to bed. I turned on the television And there was Walter Cronkite saying to three leaders of the black community, when our leader was killed, his widow held us together. Who's going to keep your people in line? I thought, well, he couldn't have said that. He could possibly have been that ignorant. When our leader was killed, was JFK the leader only of white people? I thought he was the leader of all of us. His widow held us together. See how civilized we are? Wait a minute. Who's going to keep your people in line? Now, I thought that blacks were our people. I thought we were all in this together. And here's this man who, previous to that, I had thought God must look like Walter Cronkite because Walter Cronkite knew everything. All of a sudden, he didn't know everything. I was furious, so I changed the channel. And there was Dan Rather saying to three black males, don't you Negroes think you should feel sympathy for us white people during this experience because we can't feel the anger at this killing that you black peoples can? I was, for the love of God, how could you not be angry at hearing that another human being who had no ulterior motive other than to make things better for all of us had been killed? How could you think that you don't have to be angry about that? I rolled that teepee up, I threw it into the floor of the closet. I got my husband's supper. When he came in, he said, they killed him, didn't they, Jane? I said, yeah, they did. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to do what Hitler did. What are you talking about? I said, I'm going to treat my children positively or negatively on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they have no control tomorrow. He said, what do you mean? I said, I mean, I'm going to split my class according to their eye color, just as Hitler did. One of the ways you wouldn't got thrown into the gas chamber during the Nazi years was by having brown eyes. If you had a good German name, but you had brown eyes, they threw you into the gas chamber because they thought you might be a Jewish person who was trying to pass. He said, you can't do that. If you do that, you'll lose your job. I said, if I lose my job for teaching the truth to my students, I would rather not teach in Riceville. He said, Jane, we need that money. These kids need that. I said, Daryl, this is what I'm going to do. He was really upset and really worried because he knew something I didn't know. He rode back and forth from Riceville to Charles City to the Oliver plant every day with grown white males who were born and raised in Riceville, Iowa. And they said the kinds of things in his presence that he had stopped saying once he got to Waterloo and learned that the things they said weren't true. But he went along to get along because that's what we do. And someone has said the only thing necessary for the perpetuation of evil is for good people to do nothing. Now, all you have to do when racist remarks are made, all you have to do is keep your mouth shut, and that will perpetuate the evil of the racist remarks. All you have to do when you hear about a black man being shot for no reason except that he wasn't obedient enough where the white policeman was concerned, if you just sit back and watch and say, well, he asked for it, that's perpetuating the evil of racism. We need to put a stop to that. I couldn't believe that my husband wouldn't support me and that he didn't understand what I was saying. So we went to bed. I got up the next morning, got ready for school. I walked out the door and he said, are you going to do that exercise? I said, yes, I am. He said, you'll regret it. And I walked out quickly because I didn't want him to see the tears in my eyes because I expected him to support me on this and he wasn't supportive and I was really, really disappointed. I went to school, the first person in the room, Stephen Armstrong, came in and said, hey, Elliot, they shot that king last night. Why'd they shoot that king? I said, well, Stephen, we're going to talk about that. So after we did the things you have to do in the third grade, according to the standard elementary curriculum, first we said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag with the words under God in it. Now, when I was in third grade, the words under God weren't in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. They don't belong there. We have separation of church and state in this country, and the words under God do not belong in the pledge if children are going to have to see it in the classroom, which is a government-supported place. You do not have the right to do that. In fact, you are not supposed to do that. You aren't supposed to pray in school. Putting under God into the pledge made it into a little prayer. And that didn't happen until Ike Eisenhower became president of the United States. And he put those words in there because the Knights of Columbus lobbied their congressmen to get the president to put the words under God into the pledge. They don't belong there. So after we said that, then we sang God Bless America, which is a hymn. I never thought of it as a hymn, but it is. It's asking God to bless America. So we broke the law twice. And then we started to talk about the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. And I asked these kids what they knew about Black people, and they knew every negative stereotype that I had ever heard, and some that I had never heard of. And I finally said, how do you kids know these things are true? And that year and every year after that, they said, because my dad said so. Males and females, if you're going to be parents, be careful what you say around your children. Because if you make racist remarks around your children and they come to some teacher like me, your kids will repeat it, and I'll know what you are all about when you are in your home, and it won't be good, and I'll teach in opposition to your beliefs. If you're going to teach racism in your home, it is my responsibility to teach against that racism. Now, I shouldn't have believed that that was the way to do it, because my first elementary social studies teacher professor at what was then Iowa State Teachers College, is now University of Northern Iowa, said on the first day of class to these young would-be instructors at some time, said to us, when you get in the classroom, you must not teach in opposition to the local mores. Mores, M-O-R-E-S. I told somebody that, and he spelled it M-O-R-A-Y-S, so it made it into eels. It's the local customs. You must not teach in opposition to the local mores. The people who are paying your wages through their taxes have the right to have their children learn what they want them to learn. In other words, and I knew he was wrong at that time. I was 19 years old, and I thought, well, you're some kind of an idiot. My dad would have said he's an educated fool, because here this professor is standing up there telling us to do something that is absolutely wrong if you're an educator. If the local mores are racism, you have to teach in opposition to racism, because it is the aim of an educator to lead people out of ignorance. And only those who are extremely ignorant believe in the myth of race, of several different races. You need to realize that. If you still believe in the myth of several different races, you have a problem. And skin color isn't your problem. Ignorance about skin color is your problem. And if you still have that problem after the age of 15, you've had some really bad teachers from age 3 to age 15. And you need to go back and tell them you need to take the course over, and so do they. Now, the reason we have racist laws in this country and racist curriculum in this country is because the people who write the laws don't know the difference about skin color. They think there really are 3 or 4 different races on the face of the earth. And you need to read this book, The Color of Law, by Richard Rothstein. And when you read this book, you're going to find out that we have all kinds of laws. For instance, just as a for instance, segregation. In cities all over the United States, cities are segregated, and you think it's because people of different colors don't want to live together. You're wrong. The reason we have those laws is because the people who wrote those laws believe in the myth of several races, believe that the people in those communities believe that myth, and would rather they would live separate, and so they write de jure. Most of our segregation is de jure segregation, which means it was put in place by our laws, which are wrong. If you don't believe that, listen to this sentence. In the 20th century, now remember, we are now in the 21st century, but in the 20th century, federal, state, and local officials did not resist majority opinion with regard to race. In other words, they did what the people in the community would want them to do, according to their belief about race. Instead, they endorsed and reinforced it actively and aggressively. People, think about that. If churches, universities, and hospitals had faced loss of tax-exempt status for their promotion of restrictive covenants, they most likely would have refrained from such activities. You have to read this book, people. And when I read this book, I made this note at the bottom. White Americans want to keep their whiteness. And that's what I found out yesterday. These millennials don't want to give up their race. Why do we have to be all one race? Why can't we keep our race? I think these millennials' white children who aren't white, because there's no such thing as a white person, and those millennials who are black, don't realize there's no such thing as a black person. There are very light brown-skinned people and very dark-skinned people, but white and black are words to describe skin color that should have gone out certainly in the beginning of the 21st century. We know better, so why don't we do better? I was shocked at what those kids did. And then I said, okay, since you don't seem to know much about what it's like to be black in this country, you have any idea how it would feel to be black? No. Would you like to do something that let you know that? Yeah. I said, would you like to do something today that will give you a chance to find out how it feels to be a black child in the United States of America? Yeah. It was like we've already gotten out of spelling and handwriting. keep this broad talk and we don't have to learn anything all day long. So I said, okay, today we're going to judge by people by the color of their eyes. And since I'm blue-eyed and most of the students in this room are blue-eyed people are going to be on the bottom the first day. And immediately they said, what do you mean? I said, I mean blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They're as clean as brown-eyed people. They aren't as civilized as brown-eyed people. And little Debbie sitting in the front row, little brown-eyed Debbie looked up at me. This little 9-year-old child looked up at me, this 33-year-old woman, 35-year-old woman, 34, and said to me, how come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes? And I thought, good Lord, there it is. She now has the power because of the color of her eyes to contradict and to argue with her teacher. She has never had that power before, but I gave her magic eyes. It was absolutely astounding. All of a sudden, I found out how racism works, and I found out how it feels to be on the receiving end of it. And then blue-eyed Alan Moss in the back row stood up and said, if she didn't have them blue eyes, she'd be the principal or the superintendent. They're both brown-eyed. And I thought, oh, good Lord. And there it is. He's blaming my behavior on the color of my eyes. And if I had better eyes, I'd be a better person. People, that's what we do in this society all day, every day. If you weren't black, you'd be all right. You'd be a pretty good president if you weren't black. You're white, so you're going to make a good president. Even though you don't know up, you're going to be a better president than that black one was. People, we do it all the time. And my third graders did it within 10 minutes after starting the exercise. I watched horrendous things happen in my classroom that year. I had 4 brown-eyed dyslexic boys in that classroom. When you're dyslexic, you don't hear words the way they're said, and you don't see words the way they're written. The day those 4 dyslexic boys were on the top of that exercise, they read words I knew they couldn't read, and they spelled words I knew they couldn't spell. And the only thing it had changed was I had changed my expectations of those students, and they changed their expectations of themselves. People, you hear all about expectations. You don't realize how really powerful they are until you put a group of people of any age through that exercise. And I've done that exercise with people from the age of 8 to the age of 80. And I get the same results with adults, so-called adults, that I get with 9-year-old children. Immediately after you start that exercise, adult people, and they are adult children, who have their BA, their MA, and their PhD, cannot function academically in that situation because they have the wrong color eyes. And no matter what they do, they can't succeed because I won't let them. But I blame it on their eye color. It works no matter what your age, no matter what your stage, no matter what your image in your community. I can wreck your image of yourself by simply treating you unfairly on the basis of a physical characteristic over which you have no control. Eye color, which is caused by the same chemical melanin that skin color is. People, think of how ridiculous this is. Think of how absolutely almost insane it is for us to behave as a society the way we are behaving right now. I watched Carol, the Lutheran minister's daughter, came into my room in February reading at the 6th grade levels in 3rd grade. She was absolutely brilliant. She had a steel trap mind. I've never seen anything like her. On the day she had the wrong color eyes, Carol, who the day before could read at the 6th grade level, made mistakes in reading, made mistakes in spelling, and she forgot how to multiply. I had taught her how to multiply the first 15 minutes of math class the first day she was in my classroom. She never made a mistake in multiplication again until the day she had the wrong color eyes. And on that day, that child could not function academically. She walked with her shoulders hunched as if to ward off an expected blow. She stumbled when she crossed the classroom. She came in from recess crying, and I said, "What's going on here?" As she walked across the playground, 2 brown-eyed Debbies and a brown-eyed Cindy walked up behind her, reached up, struck her across the back with her forearm, Debbie did. And when Carol turned around, Debbie said to her, "Now you have to apologize to me for getting in my way because I'm better than you are." Now, up until that very moment, those kids had been best friends. I changed their friendship because of the color of their eyes. It wasn't because of the color of their eyes. It was because I weaponized their eye color. We weaponize skin color in this country on a daily basis. And right now, white folks are weaponizing Black Lives Matter. I don't want to give advice to people of color who know more about what goes on in this country than I do, but you don't know as much about whites as I do. Make no mistake about that. I know white people. I know these melanin suffering people. You need to know that when a white person hears Black Lives Matter, they hear only Black Lives Matter. You need to realize that's the reason you're having a problem with people accepting that statement. Now, you can fix that. You can de-weaponize that statement by simply putting the word "to" on the end of it. Black Lives Matter too. Then that means that includes everybody, not just Black lives, but everybody else. You have to de-weaponize things for us white folks because we think only from our perspective. We have not been taught empathy in the schools in this country. I found out that day that what I was teaching was empathy. I was teaching my children, literally teaching them to walk in the shoes of another child, of another color, of another culture in my classroom for a day. We learned more, I learned more than I wanted to know. I watched my third grade brown-eyed children become me. I watched them exhibit all the behaviors and all the attitudes that they learned from the significant adults in their environment. And I am one of those significant adults. And I watched them become me. I was embarrassed. I was angry. I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at me, and I was angry at their previous teachers, and I was angry at their parents. How dare we allow children at the age of 9 to believe that it's all right to treat people positively or negatively on the basis of the color of their eyes because their teacher says it's all right, and on the basis of the color of their skin because the society says it's all right. This is absolutely antisocial behavior, and we need to fix it. I went to my mother's house that night and told her what was going on. She said, Jane, you better be careful. You don't want to end up where Aunt Eunice did. I said, where did Aunt Eunice end up? In a mental institution. You see, what I was describing sounded insane, but you have to realize that what I was doing, I created a microcosm of society in my third grade classroom. And when I described it to my mother, she thought it sounded insane because what we are doing and have been doing in this country for the last 250 years is insane. It is illogical. It is unreasonable. It is based on a lie, the lie of several different races. Now, I could go on and on about this, and if you give me the next 3 hours, I would, because there are things I learned in those 3 days, in those 2 days, 3 days, because the second day, the blue-eyed people were on the top and the brown-eyed people were on the bottom. And one of the most significant things I learned was the day the blue-eyed people were on the bottom, the boys in the restroom were talking about how they were going to get even with those brownies when it was their turn. On Monday, we reversed the exercise. An amazing thing happened. Blue-eyed students were much less vicious to the brown-eyed students than the brown-eyed students had been to them. So on Tuesday, before we discussed the exercise at all, each child had to write a 4-paragraph composition telling who Martin Luther King Jr. was, how the child felt on Friday, how the child felt on Monday, and what discrimination is. When they had finished writing, we got in a circle, and I said to them, now, in a magic circle, you know that thing. I said, kids, I want to know, you blue-eyed kids said you were going to get even with the brown-eyed kids. Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you treat them as badly as they treated you? And they said, because we found out how it feels to be treated that way, and we didn't want to make anybody feel the way we felt the day we were on the bottom. Now, you melanin-challenged folks need to know, those of you who are melanemic need to know that that might be our hope. I know that many of you are scared to death. You know what the demographics of this nation say. They say that by the year within 30 years, white people will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. And that is one of the major fears that melanemic people have in this country. And it was expressed perfectly at Houston University a couple of years ago, said to me, if those people get power, aren't they going to want to get even with us? I said, that's your major fear, isn't it? That they get power, those people, they'll want to get even with you. She said, yes. I said, well, let's find out. And there were 1,500 students and teachers in that auditorium. Half of them were Black. And I said, well, okay, let's find out. Well, every Black person in this room who considers him or herself a member of the Black race and who wants to get even with all white folks, please stand. 3 young Black males stood. Everybody else just looked around at him like, are you crazy? And I said, see, are you more comfortable now? She said, well, yeah. I said, they don't want to get even with all of us. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that, right? Okay. And I said, but now let's be honest about this. Will every Black person who wants to get even with 1 or 2 white people please stand? Every one of them stood up yelling and cheering and laughing and high-fiving one another. They had finally had someone say to them, yeah, I understand you want to get even with 1 or 2. And this woman, now she's upset again. I said, see, they don't want to get even with all of us, but each one of them wants to get even with 1 or 2. Now, if you want to be treated fairly in the future, what you'd best do is treat people fairly in the present so that you aren't one of the one or two they want to get even with. Does that make sense to you? And she, uh-huh. And I said to the audience, does that make sense to you? And all those black kids applauded and cheered and said, yeah, yeah, that'll work. That'll work. And they said, preach it, Elliot. Now, I'm not a preacher, but I'm telling you that if you want to be comfortable in the future, you'd better start making people who are different from yourself comfortable in the present. If that doesn't make sense to you, I don't know what will. But what that means is you're going to have to give up the golden rule because you don't practice it anyway. The golden rule says, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. If I asked you if you want to be treated the way we have treated black people in this country for the last 250 years, you would say, no, you don't want it. You don't want to be treated the way we treat others. I don't. I have the right to treat other people the way I want to the way I want to be treated. I know if I get on an airplane, and I do that a lot, or used to before COVID-19, when I'd get on an airplane, if I had a piece of luggage to put in the overhead rack, if some young man said to me, can I put that up for you, ma'am? I say, yes, thank you very much. You had good parents. However, if he has a piece of luggage to go over in the overhead rack, and I say to him, do you want me to put that up for you, Sonny? He'll say, no, I can do this myself. He doesn't want to be treated the way I want to be treated, and neither does anybody else. In order for me to be fair to other people, I have to treat them not the way I want to be treated, but the way they want to be treated. And in order to find out how they want to be treated, I can't walk up to the next person of color and say, how do you black folks want to be treated? I have to read and study and learn about those who are different from myself so that I won't make some really ugly mistake. I believe in the platinum rule, which says, do unto others as others would have you do unto them. I honestly believe in that, and I work hard at it. But in order to know how others want to be treated, I have to study how others have been treated, how they are being treated, how they are behaving, and what are some of the reasons for some of the problems we have in this country where race is concerned. And the biggest problem we have in this country is the idea that there's more than one race. There isn't. Now, are there any questions? I understand that I'm supposed to leave time for a question and answer period. We better hurry up, hadn't we? Are there any questions? No questions.
Yes, we do have some
Okay.
questions. I'm the filter for our questions. I am
All right.
We've had some issues in our school system, and we have a couple people who've asked some questions around that, where students used racially charged language and attacking some of the students of color, that students brandishing guns. And one of the questions is, what should be done with, as you identified, the melanin challenged students who are engaged in acts of assault against other students in the class based upon racist identification? What should the school system be doing about these issues?
They should make it a very uncomfortable and unwelcoming environment for people who are going to exhibit racist behaviors and speak in racist ways. If your school system, if any school system would treat the 3 R's of rights, respect, and responsibility, you wouldn't be having the problems you're having in your school systems today. We do a really bad job of teaching reading, writing, arithmetic. A third of our students can't read above the 6th grade level when they leave high school. You know that, I know that, but we don't talk about it. If we aren't doing a good job of that, then at least we could do a good job of teaching the 3 R's of rights, respect, and responsibility. We have to teach at the college level. We have to teach that every student on that campus has the same rights to a comfortable, non-threatening environment. And if you have students who are coming in there who have been encouraged to believe in the myth of white superiority, then you have to say to all the students, these behaviors will not be accepted on this campus, period. That's the way it is. If you exhibit these behaviors, the first time it happens, we'll warn you. The second time it happens, you will be suspended for a time. And the third time it happens, you will be expelled, period. That's it. We will not tolerate this. The only thing necessary for the perpetuation of evil is for good people to do nothing. You must not tolerate that behavior, and you must let your students know that behavior will not be tolerated. You are, as an educational institution, it is your job to lead people out of ignorance. And the number one ignorance in the United States of America is the ignorance of the belief in the superiority of lack or presence of melanin in your skin. That is total ignorance. It isn't stupid. You can't change stupid. You can change ignorance, and you do it with education. Does that answer your question?
Yes, you're identifying that race is a biological fiction, which you're absolutely right. That every bit of science supports that. So how did we get to the point culturally that what's the origins, if you will, of this notion of race being fixed in the way in which we think about it?
Read the book The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman. And in the first two chapters, he will tell you how the idea of different races came about. There have always been different color groups. There have always been different nationalities. There have always been different cultural groups, different language groups. Look, that is natural, that is normal. And since skin color is natural and normal, it was only during the Spanish Inquisition that Torquemada and company decided they would have to find another way other than religion of deciding who to kill, and they set upon skin color, because they could tell people of color from people who were less colorful. And that's how this whole thing started. It has only been alive since the late 1500s, late 1400s and early 1500s. You need to realize that this has not gone on forever. It was concocted, and now it's time to destroy it. And we could if we chose to. We could destroy racism in 2 generations if we chose to. Educators could do that. If we truly led students out of ignorance, they would not believe in the myth of white superiority ever again, because you can see the color of my shirt. What color is it? What color is my shirt?
White.
White, thank you. Then what color is my skin?
It's kind of a you.
Is it white? Is it white? Hell no, it isn't white. You know it isn't white. I know it isn't white. White is the word we use to describe those who aren't highly melanated. Well, those, if you don't have enough iron in your blood, you're called anemic. If you don't have enough melanin in your skin to give your skin a brown color, then you must be melanemic. So instead of calling people white, let's call them melanemic. And if you have a lot of something, if you're really good to eat, you are delicious. All right, let's say that those who have lots of melanin are melanicious. They have a lot, so they're obviously superior because they have more melanin. It makes just as much sense to say that as it does to talk about white superiority. There is no such thing as white. Get over it. Did I answer your question?
Yes. A lot of your recommendations have been around individual actions and how we deal with these issues on an interpersonal level. Do you have some thoughts at a systemic level, our institutions? What should governments be doing in order to dismantle racism?
Governments will do whatever the majority of the people who are being governed will allow them to do. And when the majority of people in the United States of America say, no, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take this anymore, we're going to put a stop to this. And if you have enough people who know who Frederick Douglass was, Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. Demand it. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them, and these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. If you don't want this stuff to go on, get into a group, a large group, enlarge that group on a daily basis, join those folks who are protesting, and when the president sends out what he says are federal troops, you need to get those costumes off those men and find out whether they are indeed federal troops or whether they are that group of, is it Blackwater people? Who the Secretary of Education has a brother who has a group of troops that he has trained to go into countries to put down insurrections or to begin insurrections. Now, I want to know whether those federal troops that went into Portland, Oregon were really federal troops or were they really that group? And I want to know, and I think we have a right to know. When they treated those people in Portland the way they did, that was unconstitutional. They should have been stopped, but people were afraid to stop them. People, stop them. When you've got a group of people coming into your community and they are trying to put down a peaceable protest, and there is such a thing as a peaceable protest, you need to then become less peaceable and say, no, we're not going to allow this to happen in our community. You are not going to do this. We will settle this. We can take care of this ourselves. We do not need you. And you need to know something else, Frederick Douglass said. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. He said, where justice is denied, as it is in this country, where poverty is enforced, as it is in this country, where ignorance prevails, as it does in this country, because we still believe in the myth of 3 or 4 different races, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. You will not have a safe, quiet, gentle society as long as you have people out in the streets demanding that those who are protesting the ugliness of racism be stopped. We have to protest the ugliness of racism or it will never stop. We have to let all our governing agencies realize that, no, we're not going to take this anymore. Every black person, so-called black person, every brown person is one of my 30th to 50th cousins. I will not allow them to be abused, run over by a car, by a group of people who call themselves white supremacists. If you are indeed supreme, my friend, you don't have to kill people to prove it. Now think about that. This is how a superior person behaves? Kill the opposition? I don't think so. Let us reason together. I believe it says that in a book that I have read. Let us reason together, but not with guns in hand. I think that university should say, leave your guns in the dorm, or leave your guns at the door. When you come to this university, leave your guns at home. Don't take your guns to town, son. Leave your guns at home. There's a good song about that. However, we could refuse to allow guns on campus. There's no law that says you have to allow guns on campus. And if you have an open carry law in your state, you need to say, that's fine, but you're not going to do it on this campus.
I have a question about one of your earlier recommendations of reframing Black Lives Matter to Black Lives Matter too. Some people would say that that plays into the fragility and sensitivities of white people and asking Black folks to make compromises in the ways in which they participate, communicate, engage in the system, and reinforce.
In the first place, are you hearing me? Because you stopped. Okay. See, I don't believe, and I've read White Fragility. I read White Fragility. I think it is another explanation or excuse for white ignorance. If you have gotten past the age of 15 and you still believe that there are 3 or 4 different races, you aren't fragile, you're ignorant. And you need to be educated. And if you have gotten past the age of 15 and you don't recognize your biases and whether they are unconscious or conscious, you need to go back and get some more education. You have been miseducated. Okay, now, we use words like white fragility and unconscious and conscious bias and macro and microaggression to explain things that people are going through instead of saying, look, the truth of the matter is, if you're over the age of 15, you know why you're doing what you're doing, and you need to put a stop to it. My dad expected us to know the difference. He would say to us, you know the difference between right and wrong? Now do the right thing, goddammit. Now, he didn't use goddammit as a swear word. He used it as a punctuation, as a absolutely, here's what you'd better do. We all know the difference between right and wrong, but if you have been educated, so-called educated, if you have been indoctrinated with the myth that there's more than, we need to be taught a different way. We need, if we can do away with the idea of several different races, we can do away with racism. Because if we're all members of the same race, then you're just fighting over skin color. And when you're just fighting over skin color, that says, well, this is pretty ridiculous. This is pretty ridiculous. We need to put a stop to it. Did I answer your question?
You did. I have one other question that's along these lines, I think. Some folks have made the argument that police officers will see and weaponize race that it happens, whether it's with Jacob Blake whether that happened this past week, whether we're talking about Breonna Taylor, whether we're talking about Sandra Bland that happened in Texas, that police officers, when they see for people who are whose skin color is different from their own, that is identified as a set of deficiencies. How do we help people unlearn that? That the step
We
moving quickly to not understanding or thinking about those differences doesn't seem to address the
we
problem.
have to re-educate the police department, because they believe the same garbage that we all believe, that you can judge a person by the color of their skin. That is the height of ignorance. We have to send those members of that police department to a learning situation. I've done the exercise with so-called adults in groups where there were members of the police department in the group. And I always make them blue-eyed. If I can figure out whether they're members of the police department, their eyes are going to be blue if it's the last day of my life. And I make them blue-eyed, and they end up crying and saying, I didn't know, I had no idea. It does something to a man's inner workings when he has to sit down on the floor in front of 2 rows of people of other colors, some in many cases, looking down on him, and he has no choice but to sit where I tell him to, and then have an old white woman stand over him, shaking her finger in his face because he has the wrong color eyes. Now, what's your problem, fool? I know you can't understand this because you have the wrong color eyes. So those eyes are letting too much nonsense in and not enough truth. So I know why you're acting like a fool, because you are a fool, because you can't help it, because you have the wrong color eyes. Now, don't blame it on me. Blame it on your mother. Go talk to your mother and find out why in the devil she gave birth to a blue-eyed person. And there is no recourse for him but to sit there and take it. Now, he can get up and leave, and we've had a mayor in a community in Ohio get up and leave. And when the mayor left, he was blue-eyed, and he left because he couldn't take it, not even for an hour and a half or a half an hour. And this black man in the second row of the brown section said, what was he upset about? I could have gone through what you were doing to him with both hands tied behind me. That's nothing compared to what I go through every day. The mayor left, and he said he wasn't coming back in. So I said to the facilitators, you go tell that fool that there's going to be an article written about this in the paper tomorrow, and it's going to say the mayor couldn't take it and left. You go out there and tell him that. They went out there and told him that, and he came back in cowed and with his head down. And I said, now you have to apologize to every person in this room, because you just exhibited and enjoyed a freedom that they don't have. When black people get tired of racism, they can't just leave. There's no place where they can go in this country where there isn't racism. And when women get tired of sexism, they can't just walk away, because if they do, they can starve to death. Now, what are you going to do? And it took a while for us to get him to admit that he had made a big mistake, and he didn't want that in the paper the next day. You see, you have to live with the consequences of your behavior. And when melanemic people find out how it feels to be on the receiving end of that, the vast majority of them say, I'm going to change the situation. I'm going to raise children that will not allow these things to happen in their presence. And if we can raise intelligent children, we can change this situation. In 2 generations, we could wipe out racism if we chose to. We have chosen not to, because in this country, racism is extremely profitable. It's a moneymaker. Make no mistake about that.
You mentioned the 3 R's as a strategy for college students. Can you reiterate what those 3 R's are, and should we be teaching them sooner?
Absolutely, we should teach them. We began teaching against them when we're born. A group of midwives in Los Angeles called me last year and asked me if I'd come in and talk to them. I said, I know nothing about midwifery. I know nothing about delivering babies. I was delivered of 4 babies in 5 years, but I know how they got there, but I don't know how, I know how they got out, but I know nothing about medicine. She said, that's not what we want you to talk about. We want you to talk about racism, because we have all worked in delivery rooms, and we know that black and brown women don't get the same treatment in delivery rooms that white women do. I said, oh my God, it never occurred to me. She said, we know that if we don't treat them fairly, some of those black and brown babies won't leave the delivery room. And I've had black women tell me that very thing. You have to realize that we start with you before birth. Now, we could start teaching rights, respect, and responsibility at the preschool level, and we could teach it from preschool till graduate school, and we don't teach it in any of those areas. We have to recognize that every human being in this country has rights, and every other human being in this country is responsible for respecting the rights of everybody else. We have to respect one another's rights, and we have to be responsible if we refuse to show respect for the rights of others. And when people are making racist statements on the college campus, you need to say, you don't know the 3 R's of rights, respect, and responsibility. We're going to give you 1 semester to learn them and to exhibit them. And if you can't, you need to find another place to learn, because you obviously aren't ready to learn here. If you create an unwelcoming environment on a university campus or a college campus or preschool, by the gods of war, you are doing the wrong thing as an educational institution, and you have to put a stop to it. You do not have the right to allow students to disrespect other students' rights, and you have the responsibility to hold them responsible for their behaviors and their words. We have freedom of speech, but you need to remember that your freedom to make ugly remarks stops where my freedom not to hear them begins. Freedom of speech is a two-way street. It isn't just a one-way street. If you're going to make ugly remarks, you need to realize that I have the freedom not to hear them on a college campus. And the college has the responsibility to say, these will not be allowed on this campus, period. Absolutely. It's done. We're not going to do this. And now somebody's going to say, well, what about these black guys that use the N-word all the time? Black males use the N-word because that word has power for them. It's a totally different power from the power that it has when it comes out of a white person's mouth. That has become their word because white people have used it in such derogatory fashions that now they can use it and you can't. So now they have a freedom that you don't have anymore. If you hadn't exercised it with such happiness and such ugliness, it wouldn't be that attractive to them now. But we used it in the wrong way, so now they can use it, and we melanemic people can't. That makes good sense to me. I don't mind. I'm Irish, so I tell Irish jokes, but nobody else better tell Irish jokes around me. But I know what Irish people are like, so I can tell jokes about Irishmen. I don't tell French jokes because I don't know anything about the French society or the French culture. But I do know about we who are Irish, and we aren't sometimes very smart in our behaviors toward people of other color groups.
I have two more questions. One, how do we unlearn or help people unlearn race when there's so much social benefit to it?
We stop having it be socially beneficial. We stop rewarding people who are doing things that are racist in order to make money, in order to get a new position, in order to get elected. When you have somebody who is using racist rhetoric to get reelected because that person knows that that's one way to get votes from a certain percentage of the population, instead of letting it go on, we need to say, wait a minute, your freedom of speech stops where my freedom not to hear that nonsense begins. You don't have the right to do this. We don't have the right to use race as a weapon. We've got to stop weaponizing race and start weaponizing refusal to go along with racist remarks and racist behaviors. This society could be different if we chose to, and it was for a while. When Barack Obama was elected president, I thought, I don't have to do this work anymore. People are finally realizing that this is wrong, and they've elected a black man to go into the White House. And I thought that was rather remarkable, because I remember when Richard Nixon said, as president, to a group of reporters, I'm trying to save the White House for you white people. And I thought, good Lord, does this fool realize what he has just admitted? And he didn't. And he got elected and then reelected because obviously he was doing the right white thing. People, one of the things we can do this week is insist that they change the name of the White House to the President's Residence. Now, doesn't that have a rather nice ring to it? The President's Residence. It rhymes, it is lovely, and it makes sense, and it has no negative connotation. But when you call the President's house the White House, you are saying, in effect, This is only for white people. And that's exactly what Richard Nixon said. Now we need to, that's just one of the things from the 20th century and the 19th century that we need, and the 18th century that we need to change. That's just one thing that we could change that would say to the world, wait a minute, the United States of America is waking up. It has been asleep long enough. It's now waking up, and we're realizing that this kind of racism has to be stopped. You won't stop it as long as you have the president's residence. It's called the White House. Frederick Douglass's house is white, and it's in Washington, D.C. too. Do they call that the Black House? I don't think so. You see, words, somebody has said, words are the most powerful weapon devised by humankind. They are. We destroy people with words all day, every day. It's time to change the name of one of our most popular places, which is the White House, and call it what it is. Okay?
The final question we have for you. You've given us some amazing recommendations of books to read that we're wondering if you have some suggestions of maybe online conversations that are going on that will allow people to have a contact interface with the type of arguments, the type of communities that will challenge them to rethink and reprocess and challenge some of the indoctrinations that are occurring, or any other materials that we should be exploring in order to
go to my website. Go to my website. Did you download the typical statements? Did you download those from my website? Yeah. Go through those typical statements, then go through the clarifications, then go to the third page of learning materials in that bunch of materials, and go to the commitments to combat racism. Go through that, check, ask those that you've done, check those that no, those that you haven't done, then go back, circle one that you check, no, do it for a month. At the end of the month, take out that paper, make notes to yourself about what you learned by doing that one thing, then choose another one. I don't have to tell you, and you don't have to have me tell you where to go. Go to my website and read every book listed on the bibliography. I mean, every one. The problem for this country is we are not doing a good job of educating people. We are indoctrinating people. If you're going to know about this, you have to self-educate. And if you read the books that are on that bibliography, you will know where to go and who to listen to, and whether what they're saying is true or not, or whether it's slanted in a way that will increase the level of racism in this country instead of decreasing it. I am not an anti-racist. I am a pro-human. I am pro the human race. There's only one race, and I want people to stop talking about all these different races. And Lord, again this morning, when they were talking about something coming up, and there will be many different races represented, and I thought, and where are all these people coming from? Are they from Pluto? Are they from Neptune? Where are these people coming from if they're different races? Because if they're coming from planet Earth, they're all members of the same race. We've got to take that phrase, different races, out of our vernacular. It is unnecessary and it's a lie. Now, you've also got to take out biracial. If somebody walks up to me, and this happens to me all the time, and says, I'm biracial, I say, really? Which of your parents came from outer space? You know what I'm saying. I say, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. You're saying that you think that you have parents of different color groups, that you have parents of different races. You aren't. You aren't biracial. You are mosaic. A mosaic is something, as an art form that is new and different and beautiful and is made of many different elements. We are all mosaic, but none of us are biracial. We are all from the same origin, which was those first modern human beings who were very, very dark skinned because they evolved in a place where there is immense amounts of sunlight. And the only reason my skin is as light as it is because they moved into the area that is now Ireland, and they weren't exposed to much sunlight, and so my skin, my eyes, and my hair got lighter. And it got a lot lighter, you see, a lot lighter. The older I become, the lighter my hair becomes. But my skin doesn't get any lighter. So get over it, people. Just get over it. It is ridiculous, and it needs to be stopped. What's your next question, or is that the last one you have?
That's our last question. I am deeply appreciative of you being here with us, that we have taken to heart your challenge to self-educate. and to help our city do that. And your presence here for us is part of that, that you're asking us some very deep and probing questions. And I love that you're challenging us to rethink some of the fundamental ways in which we come to understand who we are and think about some of the differences that we have arbitrarily identified between ourselves and use that as a vehicle for moving towards changing the policies, practices, and procedures that facilitate the maldistribution of opportunities that we have across the board in our society, whether we're talking about policing or education or who even gets to live in the city of Decatur. So thank you very much for being here. We are truly deeply appreciative that you've shared your time and your wisdom with us today.
You're very welcome, and I hope we've learned something. But you want to remember that fundamental for the rest of the world isn't the same as fundamental for people who are melanemic, because we think if it's fun for us, it must be fun for everybody else. But it's not. It's fundamental, and we better use our mental in order to decide whether it's fun for everyone.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you to all of the people who showed up here today. Our next event is on September the 17th, and we will continue this conversation with Catherine Meeks, who does a tremendous amount of work in the city of Atlanta around some very similar issues. You all have an excellent day.